Hello and welcome to another episode of Connection Alchemy. I'm Emma Buggy, your host, and this is Andy Hicks.
Hello.
My dear friend, I'm a relationship coach and Andy is a mindfulness coach, and we are going to be talking today about polarisation, because if we look around the world, it is just so full of tension and stress and polarisation at the moment on multiple levels. And this podcast is all about how to understand what's really going on when we're in conflict with each other. Very often we speak from a relationship level or from a level of human relations at home and work. But actually, I think it's really the way in which we are in conflict with one another in our relationships is mirrored on the macro level in society, and the way in which we're in conflict in society is mirrored back to us on the micro level in our relationships. So I feel like there's a lot of similarities in the way that we create separation and othering, both within our romantic relationships, our family relationships, and in the wider context, worldwide and globally. So Andy's going to kind of bring us into that topic, and we'll take it from there. Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Well, at the time of recording, we've just had about a week of riots in the UK, and this is one of many issues that are going on at the moment where there is this intense polarisation. Not to say that there's an equal number of people on both sides, but there is one side, both sides thinking each other are completely wrong and completely immoral and hating each other.
Bad and evil, even.
Bad, evil, insane, often as well.
Yeah.
And one of the writers I think that both of us really appreciate is someone called Charles Eisenstein. And I feel very convinced by his argument that one of the biggest problems we face in society is polarisation, because it prevents us actually addressing the issues. It stops us making progress with dealing with the challenge of higher levels of immigration or climate change or crime, whatever it is, because we're so busy just focusing on, I hate you for what you think about this issue.
Yes.
So there's no progress that's getting made, or less progress than if we were able to have a bit more understanding of a different point of view.
Yeah. We get lost in, I think, Yoram Mossensen, one of my main teachers, and I believe also Marshall Rosenberg, who is the developer of nonviolent communication. Both of them will say that we end up lost in the game of who's right and who's wrong.
Yeah.
And we just play this game tit for tat. I'm right, you're wrong. No, I'm right, you're wrong.
Yeah.
And this finger-pointing, blaming, judgmental game is where we just keep getting deeper and deeper into that entrenchment of opposing views, and that there is such a thing as a right perspective and a wrong perspective. And we can go so deep into that entrenchment that there's literally no space, like you say, or energy or ability to deal with the bigger issues.
Yeah. And if you try to do something constructive about an issue, ignoring the people who disagree with your view or your approach, they might just try and sabotage it rather than work with you. Yeah. It's unlikely to be effective or as effective as if you can find a way to include their perspective on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and the reason that they will try and sabotage it because they don't feel heard. Yeah. They don't feel included. Their needs are not included in whatever it is that you're trying to do in order to bring clarity to the situation.
Exactly. Yeah. So we both feel a little bit nervous, I think, about talking about the riots that have been going on. We're not claiming to be experts about it. We're not claiming to really understand both sides. But what we thought we might do is take a quote from social media and explore it a little bit, how both of these quotes show that they are demonizing the other perspective, and try to understand a little bit more what's going on underneath that. Do you want to say a little bit about why you might want to do that? So whatever perspective you hold on a particular issue, when you come up against the opposite perspective, saying, no, you're completely wrong, I hate what you're saying, I even hate you for the fact you're saying it, why bother even trying to engage with someone like that and trying to understand where they're coming from?
Well, engagement and understanding are two different things. I will focus on the understanding, because the engagement is a choice. How much do I want to engage with an individual that has a different perspective is very much dependent on your energy, your focus, your intention, who it is you're talking to, where, when, all of those things. But implying empathy and understanding to an opposing perspective, one that seems so opposite and so different from yours, is a very powerful way to actually see what the other person is actually trying to care for. Because it's very easy to just say, oh my God, their views are so wrong, their views are so evil, why would I even bother trying to listen to them? In fact, if I just put them over there in that camp as those evil, wrong, bad people, in a way it's easier. I don't need to then actually listen to what they're trying to say to me, and I can just focus on my perspective being right. And if I do that, then we're just going to keep playing that game of who's right and who's wrong. And that voice will get louder and louder, and eventually very violent in some cases, because that voice is not being heard and understood. So it actually supports anti-violence and supports us to come into some possible paradigm where maybe there are peaceful solutions, maybe there are ways that we can work together. And even before that, if we can just hear what the other person is caring for, we no longer dehumanize them and see them as an animal or a monster or someone evil, and we can start to hear what are they actually caring for underneath, which is much more likely to get us to a point where we can do something together. Yeah, so that's why it's important.
So would you say that by not being willing to listen to someone who you profoundly disagree with, you might be contributing to the conditions that create violence?
Not might be, it's like, and again, not to blame people. If you're not willing to listen, that's also coming from a place of self-protection, because maybe you're in so much hurt and pain because of what you've gone through. But the societal kind of like we live in a time when there's such a lack of empathy and understanding for the other side when we get into those places, and that does contribute to the conditions that we find ourselves in. It's very easy to get into a spiral of right and wrong, and the language of othering and the dismissal of the other side only creates more of the tension, more of the fire, more of the violence. So we can contribute to the violence when we dismiss the other side.
Right. Yes. Yeah, because it's, and I find that an interesting perspective, because it seems like for a lot of people, the default reaction, and perhaps what they might perceive as the most moral reaction, is to fight against what they're hearing, to sort of shut it down, to sort of demonize the person for saying what they're saying, to say that they shouldn't be allowed to say it, to want to maybe lock them up.
Yes.
And all of those reactions might actually be exacerbating the situation.
Absolutely. And it's so, like, this is where I feel nervous to talk about this stuff on the podcast, because we have this term that we call PC, like politically correct languaging. And there's two avenues I want to bring up, which is, I think it's important to use language that is actually caring for each other's humanity. And when we label each other, or we speak about each other in ways that is derogatory, and not taking into consideration the impact that it has on that group of people, then we are adding to the violence, we're adding to the separation culture, we're creating that sense of us and them, less than and more than. If you belong to this group of people that I am labeling in this politically incorrect way that we might say is politically incorrect, I'm adding to the violence. And at the same time, if we make people who choose to use those terms or choose to use that language as wrong or bad, and we shut them down and we say your voice is not valid because you're speaking in such a way and you shouldn't be speaking in that way, then we also shut down their voices. We shut down their ability to express what's going on. And of course, we can call for a deep wish for responsibility around language and say, please choose a different language to say the same thing. But the truth is that most people on planet Earth have not been educated in using a language that actually expresses with clarity what's important for them. We have been educated in a system of right, wrong thinking, good, bad thinking. And that evil versus good is so ingrained in our culture and in our languaging that many people, when discussing issues that are important to them, are going to blame and judge and point fingers and label in a very painful way.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I'm wondering if someone listening to this might be thinking that it might seem a bit naive or a bit delusional that you have people potentially chanting racist slogans, setting something on fire, beating people up, and we're like, well, what we should do is we should sit down with them and empathise with how they're feeling in this moment. And it just seems like, what are you talking about? We need to meet them with force. We need to we need to be tough with these people.
Yeah. And I think there's almost like a call to justice and care and protection in both possibilities. Can we do both? Can we be forcefully compassionate? Because also in nonviolent communication there is a part or a premise that talks about protective use of force, and this is a very contentious area to go into, because people sometimes when they learn nonviolent communication, they can use this, well, that's protective use of force in order to incite or allow violent acts of behaviour, and say, well, I'm just protecting this person or these people using force. And so I really want to differentiate how I hold that understanding, is that if I imagine that a child is running out onto a street and there's a car that's going to run over that child, I don't care if I need to break that child's arm, rip that child's hair out of its head, make them bleed, whatever happens in order to save their life and get them out of harm's way and from the car. Afterwards, I will say to the child, I am so sad that I caused you harm in order to save you, and this is why I did that, because I was afraid that you would be run over by that car. Right? So I'm bringing compassion and understanding, but I'm needing to use force there in order to stop the child from dying. So in a sense, if people are using violence and throwing, grenades or bombs or even bricks or something like that at other human beings, we may need to use force to initially stop them from using violence. We may need to hold them down on the ground for a moment because they're throwing objects at other people. Simply standing across the street and saying to them, stop doing that, may not be enough to stop them from doing that. And so I might forcefully protect those that are in harm's way from those bricks by stopping with force. But then immediately after that, my absolute intention would be to speak to those people, understand what they're going through, let them know that I didn't want to use force and that the reason I did it was for protection. But then focus on hearing and understanding what's behind you throwing bricks. Why are you doing that? What's important for you? What am I not hearing? And I'm worried that people listening will say, they just want to fight. They just want to be...
They're just criminals.
They're just criminals. And again, I understand both perspectives. The behind they're just criminals, I imagine there's a deep fear that we are allowing the violence to go unpunished or somehow not being dealt with. We're then allowing these people to continue behaving in ways that are harmful. So there's protection and there's a call to action to make sure that it's very clearly known that those actions are not okay. And that's what might be behind they're just criminals and they just want to fight. And at the same time, what pushes a person towards violent action?
Yeah.
What pushes someone towards violent action? And there's many, many, many different reasons. I mean, it would be reductive to just say, like, you know, oh, well, every person who's throwing a brick out on the streets is doing that because they are marginalised in their communities and they haven't got work, or, you know, each person will have their own set of circumstances that will lead them towards violence, and it doesn't make the violence okay in any way, shape or form. We can condemn and condone the violence and say that's wrong. And at the same time, we can still say, what's going on? Why are you doing, what's behind that? Because if we don't ask that question, I'm very worried that those bricks will just get bigger and become bombs.
Yeah. Yeah. An analogy comes to mind: if someone's knocking on the door and you don't answer, they knock more loudly.
Yes.
And they start trying to bash the door down.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not being listened to.
Yeah.
Should we take this? Should we try and make this a little bit more specific by taking a quote? We're going to take a quote from social media. One quote that is in sort of defending the protests is from someone who's supporting the protests, and one quote, someone who's condemning the protests.
Yeah.
And try to look for what's underneath what these people are saying.
Yeah, and what's happening when they use that kind of language.
And what's happening.
Yeah, how that adds to polarisation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just also acknowledging that we're taking these quotes out of context from people we don't know.
Yes.
But we're just using this more for an exercise, an exploration.
Yeah, to focus on like the possibility of empathy and how can we understand what's going on and how we can get to the bottom of like the polarisation pandemic that's happening at the moment simply by getting curious when someone says something that you would normally find so disturbing and we can easily judge as right or wrong. So we're slowing down that judgment and looking at like what's going on in me when I hear something like that, and what might be going on for that person when they speak in such a way. Cool.
Exactly. Okay, so this is the first quote. The UK has gone from being a relatively conservative country to a fascist dictatorship in less than a month. So this is someone on X who is tweeting, posting, defending the protests, not necessarily defending the violence, but in support of some of the messages that are coming through from the protesters. And then the second quote, which is from someone who is condemning the protesters. They are disgusting Nazi fascists, and we need to cut all their throats.
So I'm just taking a moment to breathe after those two quotes. And I'm immediately struck how in both these quotes that seem to be on opposing sides, they use the word fascist. So they are calling each other fascists. And there's something very poignant in that word, fascist. And the anti-protester used the word Nazi. You know, they are disgusting Nazi fascists. We need to cut all of their throats. So I'm wanting to start with that one because for me, it's almost shocking to hear that from an anti-protester who is speaking against the violence that they are witnessing from those who are pro-protest and anti-immigration. It's almost shocking for me to hear such a language of violence coming from that side, because I could easily associate myself with somebody who would go as an anti-protester and say that this violence is not okay. I could somehow sympathise with that point of view. And yet, maybe we took a really extreme example here, but there are many lesser examples where that kind of violent language is actually a mirror of the violence that we're protesting against. It's a mirror image of the violence that we're protesting against. And so what we do when we call people Nazis, fascists, is that we dehumanize them. They're no longer human. They are the epitome of evil. And when I call you the epitome of evil, what does that do to you?
It makes me feel angry.
Yeah.
It makes me hate you back.
Yeah.
It makes me think you don't have any interest in understanding me.
None whatsoever.
None whatsoever. I've got no chance of you actually listening to anything I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so there's no point in me trying. There's no point in me talking to you.
Yeah.
I'm just going to most likely want to fight back or completely ignore you.
Yeah. And I notice when I imagine being called a Nazi fascist, I have this deep pain in my stomach. It's like someone has stabbed me right in the stomach, and it comes from this part of me. It's like I've never felt so misunderstood than I do in this moment.
Yeah.
You couldn't have got me so wrong. And it just creates like a real like helplessness, hopelessness, sadness in me.
I despair that you're never going to understand me.
No one, we absolutely cannot understand each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you think I'm the Nazi fascist, then who are you? It's like I want to defend myself and say you're the one who's behaving in that way. So yeah, we can see like that these words that we choose to use when we describe one another in moments of disruption and disrest, they massively impact the polarization, and that polarization creates even more of the violence. Words are so powerful. We're talking about the bricks, we're talking about the people who are actually throwing things. The words that we use are so powerful because they get replicated and sent around the protests and the anti-protesters, and they get tweeted and retweeted, and then those words become the image of truth. We start to put them, we start to go, oh yeah, I heard that the fascist quote. Yeah, they are Nazi fascists, and I'm going to use that quote because it's powerful.
Yeah.
And then we start to create like this really monstrous image of those people over there that are barely human.
Yeah.
It's okay for me to then throw things at you. It's okay for me to then throw bombs at you, because if you're not human anyway, if you're evil anyway, then it's my duty to cut out this cancerous thing that you are in order to protect society.
There is implicit in this kind of language a violent solution. That if you're evil, if you're fascist, what we're going to do with you? We're not going to sit you down and have a civilized conversation.
Absolutely.
We want to eliminate you. We want you in prison. In this quote, we want you dead. You're not going to be, you're not someone who I can see as part of my community, my society, someone I have any respect for. And surely what we need in this situation is more cohesion, community, listening, unity, and this language is creating the opposite.
And at the same time, I want to bring compassion to why is it that we then use such extreme language? What drives us to use such extreme language as a weapon in order to try and get our points across? So this is where I want to employ the kind of curiosity that comes when I really rest into compassion and empathy for another person. And if I can imagine myself standing in the shoes of that anti-protester as they shout, they are disgusting Nazi fascists and we need to cut all their throats. I'm imagining that a protester who is speaking from that perspective is trying to protect human life. I imagine that they are absolutely petrified and horrified by the violence that they see.
Yeah.
And that they want to, at all costs, stop this world from falling into a pit of violence.
Yeah.
And that it comes from a part of them which is like standing up and pro-life, pro-human life, protecting people. That it's like, I want to protect people. I want people to be safe.
Yeah.
I want people to be included.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, protection, safety, inclusion, and then immediately it sort of seems even more ironic in a way that you're saying, I want safety and I want it through violence. I want protection, I want it through violence.
That's the tragedy of that language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want an end to violence through violence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But really, if we strip away the words and we connect with the sentiment that I imagine is there behind that call to violence of cutting their throats, I imagine there is just such a sense of hopelessness. How do we stop the violence?
Yeah.
How do we stop the violence? I want to stop the violence. I want it to stop now.
Yeah.
I want people to be safe now, is what I hear behind a sentence that actually seems like it's calling for more warfare.
Yes, there is a sort of desperation behind it, maybe.
Yeah.
And terror.
And terror.
And I can well imagine just so many people in this country, not just in the days after these protests, but for a long time afterwards, are going to feel so much less safe walking down the street, even not walking down the street, being in their own shop or house or business. Yeah. And that fear and that anticipation of the fear that is going to sort of continue sparks this really charged desire for, we want to make people safe.
Yeah. Yeah, and it just makes me think of like any animal out there, any female mother bear or a lion, when their cubs are in danger, you do not want to go near that lion or that lioness. They are going to rip your head off if necessary in order to protect those vulnerable young lives. And the reason I bring up the imagery of animals or lions and lionesses protecting their young cubs is that that we also have an animal instinct. We are human beings and we have these minds that allow us to think and to put things into perspective, but we also have an animal instinct to protect and to keep our people safe, which can take us into a very tribal sort of tendency. So like, this is my group and these lives are worth saving more than others.
Yes.
These are the ones that I identify with. I put them into the group of those that I feel safe with and I have chosen to be with. And so therefore, when they are under threat or perceived threat, it's a natural response to want to protect using violence, even though that is a tragic response, because when we choose violence, we only perpetuate more and more and more and more violence.
Yeah, an eye for an eye.
Yeah.
Makes the whole world blind.
An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. Gandhi?
I think it's originally from Jesus.
Was it?
I think so, yeah. Because he's being quoted the Old Testament. He's saying that someone says to him, in the Old Testament, we were told an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And Jesus says, I say to you, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that. Well, it's true. I feel, or at least I feel like that sentence resonates for me very deeply in terms of violence. And I'm wondering would we like to look at the other side, the anti-protesters, the protesting, so the person who's supporting the protests, the sentence that they said and what might be beneath that.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasise, we're not saying that this person's quote is saying that they support violence or arson, but they seemingly from their social media account, are supportive of the kind of messages behind the protests.
Yeah.
So, should I just read the quote again?
Yeah.
The UK has gone from a relatively conservative country to a fascist dictatorship in less than a month. So yes, it's interesting, isn't it? As we've said, both sides using this word fascist. It might be more obvious to some people why the people who are saying these and doing these racist things, anti-Islamic things, Islamophobic things, why someone might call them fascist.
Yeah.
Why would the people who are against the protests be called fascist by the other side? From what I can see from some of the posts around what he said, it seems like he's referring to the idea that people feel that their free speech is being clamped down on, their freedoms. They're not being allowed to protest. They're not being allowed to say what they're angry about.
Yeah.
So, for example, if they are upset about there being too much immigration, just being written off as you're racist, you're not allowed to say that, and then them in reaction describing that as fascism. You're policing my thoughts.
Yeah.
You're saying I can't say what's true for me. I can't say how I feel.
Yeah.
And perceiving that as a form of fascism.
Yeah. And so what do we think is being cared for behind such a statement, that the country has become a dictatorship in less than a month? You know, I imagine that this person is feeling extremely frustrated, really angry, and afraid, maybe. Yeah.
Yep. Angry, afraid, despairing.
Yeah.
And I don't know, something like sort of trapped, like I can't be myself. I can't express myself. I can't be who I am.
I'm not allowed as I am.
I'm not allowed. I don't belong.
I'm seen as fundamentally wrong as I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my needs do not matter.
Yeah. Yeah, and in a different way, I'm not safe.
I'm not safe.
It's not safe to express what's true for me.
And in a different way, I'm not included.
I'm not included. Yeah.
So it's kind of, in a way, there's something I hear, if I were to imagine, and again, I'm making guesses. This person isn't here to talk with me, but I'm making guesses at what might be behind this statement without them being able to agree with me or not, or correct me in some way. But I still find it a helpful exercise, because we can still infer when I kind of flip this around and I ask myself the question, what is this person caring for when they use the word, you know, the UK has gone from being a relatively conservative country to a fascist dictatorship in less than a month. What are they caring for when they say that? I imagine that they are calling out for trust. They don't trust their current government. They don't trust that their voices are welcome. They don't trust that their needs matter.
They don't trust the police.
They don't trust the police. They don't trust that they are going to be heard and included. Yeah, that's what I imagine is behind that. And it's almost like they're saying, I want to experience trust. I want to be included. I want to be heard. I want to know that my needs matter here.
Yeah. Yes, and then meeting that with, you're the fascist, you need to shut up, you're wrong, you're evil, is just going to exacerbate, it's going to pour petrol on the fire of all of those feelings of anger, despair, I'm not safe, fear as well, probably.
Yeah. So again, it adds to that polarisation. The other side is going to say, we're fascists. What are you talking about? You are. And then we go into the game of who's right and who's wrong, whose needs matter more than the others, who is the victim, who is the perpetrator. That's something that is very scary to even name here, because it can feel very obvious to me that those who are migrants who are coming, I don't even like using that word, people who are coming from countries of war, people who are coming from countries where they have very low living standards, are coming here to have a better life, or to even just have some safety, to even just stay alive, you know. And so for me, it's very easy to call them the victims, and to say that those who are pro-protests are the perpetrators because they're throwing the rocks, or even if they're not throwing rocks and they're standing there saying we want less immigration, we can easily put them on the side of perpetrator. And when we use that kind of way of thinking, that lens of victim perpetrator, first of all, it's important to really recognize the impact of those that are in a state of fear. So both sides are in a state of fear, but those who are coming from war-torn countries, to see the fact that they are literally running for their lives. I think it's important to recognize that. And if I very clearly label them as victims, I take away any power that they have, and maybe they are powerless in this moment, but any human power that they have to stand up against what they experience. And if I label the others as perpetrator, I take away any of their humanity, any of their experience of being the underdog or being in a position where their needs are not being included. I immediately say, your needs don't matter because you're the perpetrator and you're the bad one. And then we create this imbalance. It feels very scary to name that, because I'm afraid that people will say, okay, so then what? Now you just say we're all equal, when actually there isn't equality here. Which I would agree with, there isn't equality here.
Yeah, and are you saying that? How someone might listen to that and think, how can you possibly say that the person setting the hotel on fire is not the perpetrator, and the person inside the hotel is not the victim? So again, I don't want to police language and say that we can't use those words. I think it can actually be very helpful to say this person is a victim of violence, because that in just 2 or 3 words we can depict the experience and the impact that they've had of being treated in a way that leaves them scared and afraid and physically impacted and maybe even dead in certain situations. So it's important to be able to say within 2 or 3 words, this person is a victim of violence, and therefore we want to do X, Y, Z in order to protect and care for that person. And we also want to be able to say this person is an enactor of violence. They have done things that have caused harm to other people. And therefore we want to do X, Y, Z in order to protect others from further harm. We want to make sure that that person knows that their actions are not okay. So if I then police the word victim and perpetrator and say that they're not the right language for us to use, it might make it very hard for us to distinguish between those two things in an easy way. And at the same time as saying that, I want to bring in the perspective that when I get entrenched into that languaging and that visualizing of those are perpetrators over there, they're wrong, they're bad, they're evil, they need to be dealt with. And those are victims over there. They have literally no say in the matter. They haven't done anything wrong. They're never, they are absolutely helpless. And that's the end of the story. Then we create more polarization, and we don't allow both sides to come to the table with their full perspectives and their needs being heard by one another. Yeah, absolutely. How do you feel about that? I totally agree. I think it's something that it's a thread running through so much of the communication that goes on in the media, social media, is they're the perpetrators, they're the victims, and it seems so clear from both sides who is in which role. But then, as you're talking, I'm imagining the people who are pro the protests or pro the message of the protests, which
Yes.
is being anti-immigration or anti-Islam. We're the victims. We're the victims of not enough housing, too
Yeah.
expensive housing. We're the victims of our community changing and mosques popping up and people coming who don't speak our language and don't go to the pub because they don't drink.
Yeah.
We're the victims of our jobs disappearing and people coming over from overseas and taking and doing jobs for very little money.
Yeah.
We're the victims of not being listened to. We're not allowed to have a voice. We're not allowed to say we don't like what's going on. We're not being
Yeah.
listened to when we say there's too much immigration.
Mm-hmm.
The perpetrators are the government. The perpetrators are the media who are shutting us down. The perpetrators are these immigrants. And we are the ones that feel helpless in this situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's. I think when you bring in this lens, it again shows how there can be this sort of mirror imaging
Yeah.
on both sides.
Yeah. And again, it's so I notice myself so wanting to protect like that by bringing in that mirror imaging. We're not then negating the real horror and pain and discomfort that people are going through on either side. When we're bringing in that, like, oh, actually, maybe this is another perspective. It's not to negate the other perspective. It's to bring in the complexity of the human experience. And I think the victim perpetrator language is used in so many contexts. And I feel very hesitant to bring in the Israel-Palestine conflict. And again, even as I use the word conflict, I'm aware that some people will say it's not a conflict, it's a genocide. It's not a genocide, it's a war. It's not a war, it's a this. It's like any language that we use has the potential to add to more fire. So again, we don't want to police ourselves from using language. And can we still be aware of what language does? Like, it's such a powerful tool. And the more we can become aware of what language does, aware and not guilty, right? Aware and then not self-policing. There's a difference.
Yeah, there's whether or not you use the word genocide or war or conflict. There's also, do you say Israel-Gaza, Israel-Palestine?
Do you say Palestine, Israel? Which one do you say first in order to show that you care? It's really...
So it's like almost all the words.
All the words.
In the way of just saying the thing that's going on.
Yeah.
Can add to the polarization,
Yeah.
can immediately show which side you're on,
Yeah.
can anger the other side.
Exactly. And then there's the word terrorist and terrorism. Now, immediately we can imagine, and I grew up, I'm half Israeli, and so I grew up in Israel hearing that word, terrorists. They're terrorists when speaking about the Palestinians. And so that word has been used, it's been weaponized to describe those that are, for example, in Hamas and using violence as a way to, express tragically what it is that they're trying to stand for. And at the same time, you can hear that if you go to a pro-Palestine march, and I've been to a couple of them, there is a lot of divisive language being shouted on the streets. Israel is a terrorist state. Israel is a terrorist state. Those words just hit me in the heart. Whenever I hear that in a protest, I cry and I crumble to the ground, because I'm like, right, okay. So we're now creating monsters of one another. They're monsters. No, they're monsters. Well, if you're both monsters, then it makes it okay to drop bombs on one another. It makes it okay to dehumanize the other side and say that their lives do not matter. If you're a terrorist and a monster, then it's okay for me to cut your throat. It's okay for me to rape you. It's okay for me to bomb. Because you're not human. You've lost every shred of your humanity.
Yeah.
And I feel like crying, because I'm so saddened by how powerful language is. Like we need to take responsibility and to understand that the words we're using are allowing stories to be created about the other side that become a very strong and what's the word? I'm looking for. Believable truth. We can easily believe the stories that we hear about the others, the other side, when certain language is being repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated, and they're terrorists.
And then shown images that support it. Like, here they are being animals. Here they are being violent or evil or whatever it is.
Yeah. And then that polarizing, that othering, that distancing becomes so strong that the bridge that needs to be built in order to even get close to understanding the other side becomes so far and so wide. The gap is so immense that it becomes really almost impossible. Not impossible, but it feels almost impossible.
Yeah, absolutely. And people often talk about every time, for example, a Palestinian person is killed by the Israeli army, there's X many more people who want to become fighters against Israel. And every time an Israeli is killed by a Palestinian, there's X many people they want to kill who are Palestinian.
Yes.
So it just has this sort of multiplying effect of the conflict every time someone is attacked.
Yeah. Exactly. So, again, if we were to just finish on that note by turning those terms on their heads, when we call someone a terrorist, whether it's in Israel, Palestine, or even now I'm hearing in the news the word terrorism, and terrorist is being used to describe the rioters.
Yeah.
So when we call somebody a terrorist, what do? We dehumanize them. We make them illegitimate. We make their points of view illegitimate, and therefore we don't have any space to listen to them.
No.
Whatever they say is wrong because they're a terrorist, and terrorists are evil. And yet, where is that coming from when I call someone a terrorist? Can you imagine what you would be caring for if you were to call someone a terrorist, Andy?
If I was calling someone a terrorist, I think I would be caring for safety and protection in a very sort of fierce way. I want to make it absolutely clear that nothing justifies your horrific actions, your violence. You can't explain it to me in a way that makes it okay. It just needs to be completely stopped, blocked, shut down. It's absolutely unacceptable. And a phrase that comes to mind when you say the word terrorist is we don't negotiate with terrorists. That your point of view, it's not something I want to entertain. And so with that is this idea of it would be dangerous for me or anyone to start to try to listen to what you've got to say if you're a terrorist, because it's just pure evil.
So then if I were to go down a layer deeper, I'm wondering if it's that you don't trust those people that you call terrorists to take you and your life or other people's lives into consideration with care and respect.
I think
in any way.
No. It would be almost putting them in the category of the Terminator, who just stop at nothing until they've inflicted as much damage as possible, even if that means that they die.
So you're deeply protecting life when you call someone a terrorist, because you're saying, I don't trust that this person values life, and I really want to protect life. I really want to protect life, and human life. Is that it?
I think that's what it comes down to, protecting human life with the strongest force possible.
You're really putting human life above all else here and saying it's the most important thing, and I absolutely cannot stand by people who are using violence against others.
Yeah. It's wanting to condemn the violence. It's wanting to protect whoever it is. I feel like the terrorists are
those that I call terrorists.
Those that I call terrorists are attacking or threatening.
Yeah.
And that desire for protection and safety trumps any rights of that terrorist to be heard, to be respected, to be empathized with. That's just not important compared to protecting these lives.
So I almost want to break this down just for a moment, because what I hear, and I hear two things that are coming through as you speak. There is the kind of the level that I would call what you care for and your motivating desire, that thing that you care for so deeply that motivates you to use the language or the word terrorist. And that, what I'm hearing in you, is I want to protect people's lives. I absolutely value human life. I think that life is the most beautiful and vulnerable thing here on earth, and it's our duty to protect each other from violence.
Yeah, and I can't bear the idea that we don't feel safe.
That we don't feel safe. Yeah, so I'm caring for safety and protection of life, which is a very beautiful thing. And then there's this storying, or the kind of ideas that come around what that looks like. What that looks like to protect life is to protect people from you, no matter what. Yeah, there's like the fact that that you are an evil person and you are not safe.
Yes.
And that's where we can get confused, because if we go into that more, that's where we start to create the story of othering. We're lost in the story of othering.
Yeah.
And perhaps it's based on very real things that we've seen in front of us. So I can't trust you. I don't trust you.
Yeah, and if I get that mixed up, then what I do, which I think is in the service of protection and safety, might actually be making me less safe.
Yes, for example?
For example, if I decide, right, so my way of dealing with these people that I think of as terrorists is to kill them, kill their family.
Yeah.
Yes. Then maybe 10 times as many people want to be terrorists now because I've just killed them and their family.
Yes.
And that now I'm less safe.
Yes. Yes. Or, I kill these people who I deem to be terrorists, or I see as having done violent acts, and therefore I call them terrorists. And I want to kill them, and then there is another retaliation because other people who are connected to them will now see me as the terrorist and want to kill me. It's tit for tat, tit for tat, tit for tat. Where does it end?
Yeah.
Andy.
Ooh, where does it end indeed?
Where does it end indeed? I think we will need to bring the episode to an end, because we can talk about this endlessly. But I'm wondering if there's a sort of... I'm actually imagining that if you feel moved by anything that you've heard us discussing, first of all, I'd love that you contact us. Tell us your opinions and thoughts. You don't need to like or agree with anything that myself or Andy are saying. And the two of us are growing and learning human beings. So please give us your honest feedback, and let us know if you're open to us sharing that feedback, because you might say something might have come up from this episode that doesn't work for you. And we might then bring that into another episode and see how we can connect. Because, again, it's an opportunity when we disagree with each other to bring in connection, to see, okay, what is this other person caring for when they disagree with something that myself or Andy has said. So really welcoming any disagreements or judgments that you have. And also, if there's something that's supported you, please let us know, because we would like to make more episodes of this nature. And then beyond that, maybe if you have any judgments that you have towards people out there in the world that have a different perspective from you, this might be an exercise where you can write out your judgment in a sentence like the ones that we heard from the protesters and the anti-protesters, and see if you can ask yourself the question, when I flip that around, what is it that I'm deeply caring for behind this judgment that I have towards the other person? What am I deeply caring for? And see if you can translate that sentence into a language of care and protection versus right-wrong thinking and judgment and putting the other person into like the evil camp over there. And let us know how that goes for you.
And to add to that, so that's looking at your own judgments. What you might also try is taking a topic where you have a strong opinion, and because what we often tend to do when we have a strong opinion is only read things which reinforce what we already think.
Yes.
So if a challenge is to read about or watch videos of people with the opposite perspective, not with the mindset of trying to disprove everything they're saying in your own mind, but actually seeing if you can see things a bit from their perspective.
Yes.
What are the needs that they're caring for?
Yes.
And maybe you could write them down and just see if you can, even a little bit, see where they're coming from, rather than shut down or argue against in your own mind what they're saying.
And the intention of that is not for you to then agree with their perspective, but it's to see if you can find the humanity behind what they're saying that you find so difficult. And this is a great tool that you can bring into your relationships at home, your working relationships. It's a tool that we can apply to any area of conflict and disconnection in our lives on any level, whether it's societal, whether it's work, school, family, and more.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Andy.
Thank you, Emma. Thanks for being up for doing this. It was a bit edgy, wasn't it?
Very edgy for both of us, I think.
But we're very interested to see what you thought of it.
Definitely. And if you'd like to work with either myself or Andy, I have some workshops coming up in September and November, which specifically show you how to apply this model of communication to your relationships so that you can communicate with more clarity and authenticity and compassion, so that you can be in conflict in a constructive way that supports you to get closer to the person that you're connecting with, rather than creating more opposition and othering. So there's a foundations course in September and an intermediate course for those who've already done a foundations in November, and I'll put links to those in the podcast notes. Andy?
I offer one-to-one coaching, and I often work specifically around the topic of anger, whether that's within a family, within a marriage or a partnership, where someone keeps getting angry and making the other person the enemy. And that is creating disconnection. It's creating a conflict which isn't going anywhere. So I help people with communication approaches and mindfulness to have more harmony and reconnection in their relationship and more love. So if you have that issue of an ongoing sense of conflict within your relationships, then I'd be happy to offer you a 30-minute consultation to see if it's something that I could help with.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for listening, and look out for future episodes with myself and Andy.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.